Okay, a while back we critiqued Maltese Falcon. That's a story book based on Dashiell Hammett, the author. And today we're going to critique what Dashiell Hammett himself considers his best story. I don't necessarily, we're going to find out if we both kind of agree with him or not, but today we're going to talk about The Glass Key.
Welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
Hey everybody, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us, thanks for watching, and for our loyal fans, thank you for continuing to support the show. You can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. We do have a Patreon, check that out for some great deals. Both Kyle and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for other critics' reviews as well as ours. And today we're going to talk about another remake of Dashiell Hammett's film, books. It's The Glass Key.
All right. So, crooked politician Paul Madvig is committed to cleaning up the crime and distancing himself from his connections to gangster Nick Varna. He instead aligns himself with the more respectable Ralph Henry. But when Ralph's son Taylor is killed, Paul sends his most trusted ally, Ed Beaumont, to uncover the truth.
Okay, so this is, I think, the third version of this story. And there's one in 1935 with director Frank Tuttle. Frank Tuttle actually directed this Gun for Hire. And the 1935 version has George Raft playing Ed Beaumont. George Raft's career, if you can find out, in the late 30s was like the George Clooney in Hollywood until he turned down the Maltese Falcon and Humphrey Bogart took over. And then Humphrey Bogart became almost the George Raft of Hollywood.
So you really just have to kill the previous one.
Right, yeah. But it's interesting to see the 1935 to compare to how different and how things evolve very fast in the film industry, because it looks very 1930s, but you see a lot of advancement of technology, camera work, and acting, even 1942, the differences just in years of advancement of filmmaking. Yes.
When you consider the fact that, someone had reminded me yesterday, when you consider the fact that we were just learning how to fly at the beginning of the 1900s, how far we've come in 100 years of technology in general, you can see why 7 years would make such a drastic difference for making a movie. I saw some screenshots from the 35 film. I wasn't able to find a good enough copy to watch the 35 one as well. But you can tell, you can see that there's like some distinct, like, just filmmaking techniques that are different.
Yeah, I'm not saying the 35 version is very different, but it's interesting to see the differences. You know, I mean, look at a 1982 horror movie compared to 1987. Very different.
Yeah.
Okay, so the reason why I wanted to pick this movie, and I picked this movie, is because it's 1942. This Gun for Hire, Paramount made that movie. We talked about the mechanics of that. And when this Gun for Hire became a hit, you can see the executive heads of Paramount is like, okay, we got a hit.
Yep.
What's something else we can do that's kind of the same, that's never the same? And they'll be like, well, this Gun for Hire, we did it because of Maltese Falcon. We have another Dashiell Hammett story? He did that. Oh, yeah, we do. We have the rights for Glass Key. Well, let's get the actors from this Gun for Hire and put them into a Dashiell Hammett movie, and that's going to be a hit.
Yeah, and it sounds like the original idea was to do Red Harvest, which was a Hammett book, but that project kind of stalled out, was left in development, ended up not ever being made, and then they switched direction to another property that they owned just to get something out, apparently because of Alan Ladd's distinct progression as a leading man. And yet it's ironic, they made this film as a vehicle for Alan Ladd. He's a third name listed again. You know, like, it's like, we're going to give you this vehicle, but we're not really going to tell people it's a vehicle for you. And it's like, what is the point of that? I don't know.
So interesting, before we get into kind of the context of it, I do have a copy of this. I gave the copy, and on the back, there's nothing really different. There's no really special features about it, but it's interesting to see. I think you can't find it anywhere else unless you get a DVD copy.
There's no streaming version, no rental version of it whatsoever. Shout Select does do great work with some of these older classic films that disappear. So if you get a chance, check out the Shout Select version of the film,
So I want to establish in 1942, like, Paramount is kind of manufacturing the look of noir, and RKO would definitely take that baton and run with it far more advanced than Paramount would do. But in Paramount, they are establishing it as their aesthetic, and then RKO would take that and pretty much run with it and make a house of noir. And if you want to know how authentic they went, they'd be critiqued Out of the Past, which is kind of the pinnacle of noirs, which came from RKO. So this is kind of not really, I would say, a very authentic noir, but it's kind of still, we're getting baby steps to there.
Yeah. Well, and what's funny, you mentioned, like the Paramount RKO relationship. I see it very similar to how Universal, in a lot of ways, today has crafted a lot of iconic horror, but then you have a Blumhouse that's like, we can do it cheaper. which is what RKO is like. We can make them just as good or better, cheaper,
which made it a little more authentic, right?
Yeah, and this is actually one of 700 films that Paramount sold to Universal, made between 1929 and 1949. Mm-hmm. So that's why even if you watch the Blu-ray of it, it's kind of funny because you'll get that Universal, like the 2000s Universal thing, the da-na-na-na-na-na, and then it goes, a Paramount picture. It always makes me giggle when they're sold off like that, but...
Right, and then you have to sometimes under contract, but you can sign that contract for other film studios and stuff like that. So it's interesting. So it definitely is entire production managed film, and what I mean is Paramount is in charge of everything. The producers are charging everything. You got to think of this is not how it is nowadays, where the director is kind of in charge and the producers are just overhead. Producers are always 100, always constantly charged. They hired the directors, actors, and everything. So it's a completely studio-made film.
Yeah.
And the reason it's 1942 is because studios worked a little bit different. They saw the movie that came out in March. They're like, okay, that film can work. Let's assemble a crew very fast. And then by later 1942, they can make out the same product. So they can, from pre-production to production, post-production, that's only could be a few months, even sometimes a few weeks, and you kick out a movie, which sometimes nowadays, even if you have a cheap film, that takes a lot of years, maybe even a year to completely finish. And that's when I established the differences right here. That's why they can sit and look at the movie that came out in March that they made and said, we'll do it again, and it comes out in a couple months later.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's interesting to see, like, when we talk about classic films, it is something where, like, the older a film gets, it almost becomes part of that niche where, like, it has to be a classic to really stand out now, because so many films during this time period were run through the mill, that if they were not tremendously well made or sometimes really lucky, they wouldn't be considered classic films because they had to run out studio system instead of auteur system.
Yes.
So yeah.
So, anyways, you can see their engines running. Okay, this Gun for Hire worked. Obviously, see the chemistry between Alan and Veronica Lake worked. Let's put them in the movie. By this time in 1942, Veronica Lake is kind of wearing out her welcome. She's high demands for nothing. She's very difficult to work with. She's very late on set. She's trying to basically be the director on set, telling Alan Ladd how to act, and even Alan Ladd's getting frustrated. So it very much was a difficult way to shoot this movie around Veronica Lake's constant demands of things. And she's kind of, after this movie, didn't really do very much afterward because she got this reputation. Overall, I think the movie is a better story, but I think the aesthetics and just the overall look of the Maltese Falcon makes it a better version of a Dashiell Hammett story. I think the story is much better, but I think the presentation of Maltese Falcon makes it a better movie of a Dashiell Hammett product. I don't know if you agree with me.
I think this is a movie with a great skeleton. I think there is a plot in here that really could work, but I don't think the film creates a memorable experience on one watch for me. Like, I think someone who, kind of like how I tend to look at horror through a different lens because I just love all kinds of horror. I think, like, this is a movie that will work for film noir fans, but I don't think people who are outside that are going to be brought in by it. The thing about it was, I had trouble after I watched the film thinking to myself, what really didn't work? Like, something didn't connect with me on a level that, like, The Maltese Falcon did, on a level that another Jonathan Latimer screenplay, The Big Clock, worked.
Yes,
very
right.
well.
That's another. You got that out before I did.
Yeah,
right.
I know things now. But like, Big Clock put all of these, like, interesting elements into like the first hour to set up for a bombastic final piece. I think that's what Latimer was attempting to do here. It feels like the last 30 minutes are building to something big, but I just felt like the fuse never got lit. And I kind of, by the end of the film, I was like, okay. I really liked the chemistry between Ladd and Lake, but I felt like there was too much focus on their chemistry on screen because they knew that they had good chemistry.
Well, you can see why the whole point of the movie being made is because simply they wanted that.
Yeah, whereas that's like the part I found least interesting of the whole film. I wanted to know more about the political machinations and the moving pieces of it. And there's some stuff lost in the tussle right there. And of course, this is the second of 4 films that Ladd and Lake did together. They made an additional 3 where they just played themselves in some of those kind of variety style films.
Yeah.
But you can see why they would put these two together. Again, they do have solid chemistry. It's just that I wanted the story, not the chemistry.
And I think you understand the story. It's hard to shoot this movie. I think it's very easy to read because you have a conspiracy. It's a murder mystery, obviously, but the murder mystery is so secondary. and someone's like, "Oh yeah, I forgot. We're supposed to find out who did this."
Yeah, it felt like the film was very uninterested in the murder mystery, and so it made us as viewers not really interested in finding. When it happened at the end, I was like, "Oh yeah, someone died." Like I was trying to remember the exact idea there. It doesn't make me want to read the book any less. I put this book on my to-read list. I am interested in reading the book, so I think that's a testament to there is something in here that works. It just didn't. The film did not cross that barrier for me.
And I think it's just because aesthetically, the camera work is very. I would put in my notes, very silent film camera work, where you just set the camera down and you get your angle shot. Where the Maltese Falcon, you have constant movement. You got constant just filling up the scenes. You have just elements that constantly remind you we have a murder mystery and everything is dangerous. There's no, even though Ed Beaumont, Alan Ladd's character, goes through the crucible in this movie that's very dangerous.
Yeah.
But it's very much, I think, trapped in old-fashioned filmmaking. I think that's what gets it. It's just very, there's no pop to the filming.
Yeah, there's a speed to the let's make this movie. Like we have to get this thing out quick, that I feel like they were less interested in some of the artistic elements that made a Maltese Falcon work. And it goes back to, again, the same thing that a great writer sets a great backbone to the story that you have to build upon. Dashiell Hammett's written a number of books that have been adapted into films, and many, many, many films. And I look at, again, like my idol, Stephen King, has written books. Some of them turn out like The Shawshank Redemption, and some of them turn out just a little bit where they don't cross the line for certain people. And this was just one where I really liked the story, the beats, and it made me interested to read it. I just don't know if I love the movie.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is, I think it falls onto that just too much of what, because it looks like a silent film with talking in it. We have director Stuart Heisler. He used to be an editor in silent films from 1921 to 1936. He immigrated from Germany during the conflict of Nazism. When he came here in America, he wanted to be a director. So 1936 and 1962, primarily just a director. With him in cinematography is Theodore Sparkle. He's a silent film cinematographer. He learned on the job. So he was just pretty much, I want to learn and learn and learn. And that's how he accumulated his knowledge. He just not went to school. He just in the early age, he just went to work. You just to learn. So he was under contract. This is really weird. This is I'll put in my notes. He's one of the rare cinematographers that Paramount had under contract, which is kind of weird because it's almost like one of those assembled things. Crews don't really get assembled on contract. Directors and
stars and writers, I suppose.
And writers.
But then they usually assemble. Like usually the director's like, well, I work with this guy. And even if he's not someone who's made a movie with you, he's making a movie with me. Yeah. So that is interesting. There's not too often you see the cinematographers getting captured up.
Yeah. So I'm trying to put the threads together. I believe how the producers worked is they hired a script, they got a script, they hired a writer for it, they got the stars, then they got the cinematographer under contract, so they got him, and then they got a director. And I think that's I think that's what really happened, because I don't think Stuart Heisler was under contract for Paramount, but I think they recruited him and said, hey, we got a cinematographer that works. He speaks German. He's German. This is why I think
you'll love him.
You'll love him. He's German. You're German. You both left, and you get along. And I think that's how the producers think. We'll put the puzzles all together. This is the formula, and it's going to kick out. It seems like a production manufactured film throughout, where the Maltese Falcon seems an authentic, own original movie, even though that's a remake.
That film feels like an auteur. Like that film's like a filmmaker who is like, I know exactly the kind of message and vision I want to portray here, and I'm pushing it all the way through the end. There's a couple things that really stand out in this movie.
After trashing it, I just want to explain production, how this got manufactured, and how. But I still enjoy it. I watched it a couple times, but
it feels to me like, again, like there's some horror movies that I like recommend to people where it's like you might love it, you might not like it, but it's kind of in that line where, as a horror fan, I love it regardless. I feel like this is one of those noir films that noir fans will love, but they might not skirt past that membrane.
In fact, I'll give him down further. If you're a Dashiell Hammett fan, like I am, you love this movie.
Fair enough. Well, a couple things I really wanted to note too. Costume design by Edith Head, who is one of the most iconic costume designers ever. And then makeup by Wally Westmore, both who did, I think, some really incredible work. Westmore did the makeup work on Double Indemnity, and was able to carry through to color films with films like Vertigo. Westmore, like you can see in this film, you can see the similarities that we would see with things like All About Eve's costume design, the things that we would see with Double Indemnity's ability to light faces. Yeah. So we've got some really interesting stuff there from a technical standpoint. They elevate the material quite a bit. I also noticed I had read somewhere that The Big Sleep had some connection to this film because they were inspired by the convolutedness of this film, and I can totally see what they mean by that, because both films kind of have a level of it's not important what's going on, it's important what the characters are doing,
right?
And I can see that kind of symbionts to it, and it's actually made me think a little bit more on The Big Sleep, like maybe I need to revisit that next year.
So right, this is kind of the method of my madness when we talked about convoluted noir, and Big Sleep is kind of a pinnacle, but this is kind of the start of it. This is another one of these catalysts because it came out just earlier, and then Big Sleep is Raymond Chandler, and this is Dashiell Hammett, and those are the two kind of the noir writers at the time. So yeah, we have, going down the list, we have Paul Medbeck played by Brian Donlevy. Now he's a very much a noir staple. He usually plays bad guys, but usually he gets his comeupping. So usually we're expecting when we see Brian Donlevy, somebody's gonna put him in his place, which happened in The Big Combo.
That's right. I was like, I know I saw him get some putting in his place.
But there's certain, how would I say this? There's certain, it's not a full charisma. There's a certain charm when you see him on film. Like, oh yes, it's Brian. Kind of like a lovely charm. Like, yeah, we see him, even though he's gonna get it.
Short of that one scene early on in the film where he's like, I would punch the guy in the face if he had this newspaper, and I'd punch him in the face if he had that newspaper. And I was like, I don't care much for you.
Oh, the scam he runs down the street of he ought to sell newspapers, right? Yeah, in the early days. So yeah, and then you have Veronica Lake playing James Henry. It's a political family, the Henrys, and then you have I want to bring it up. Her name is Bonita Granville. She plays Paul Donlevey's sister. She's actually she's the first to portray Nancy Drew on film. She did a bunch of Nancy Drew short films. Yeah. Which are kind of neat and clever. And this is one of the things, because I saw her and I was like, God, that face, I've seen it before. And then I was like, oh yeah, she's from the Nancy Drew serials. So I'm sure when you went to the theater to see movies in the 30s, late 30s, you know, you see a couple ads and short films and stuff like that. You would probably see a Nancy Drew short film, and then she did it.
Did she do this before this film?
I think this is, because she was still a teenager.
So part of me wonders almost if maybe they were like kind of like shoehorning in like to catch a crowd. You know, like she's a recognizable face. You've seen her at all the shorts, because she does feel.
Well, this just feels like a production managed film. Of course they're going to do that.
Yeah, it feels like a marketing move, and I'm not calling out her performance. It just feels like her character doesn't have a lot to do, and so getting her in there to put her name on the poster, because it's on that poster right there.
Yeah.
I feel like that might have been a marketing move of like, people might know her.
Yeah. It just feels the entire time production having their fingerprints all over the making of this movie. Now, I'm saying that's not bad. It's interesting how violent this movie begins with, even though it's just a political thriller.
Yeah.
It's primarily just a political thriller. There's nearly no private detectives, even though Ed Beaumont is kind of like the right-hand man for Paul Medbeck, and he's just trying to circumnavigate his own investigation of what really happens. But it's almost maybe a little bit of much to do about nothing.
Kind of, because again, and the whole idea being that the story is less important than the character interactions themselves, it does kind of lend itself to that.
Yeah.
Another performer I want to talk about, Richard Dunning, Taylor Henry. Our body, if you will. I was so excited when I saw his name because I recognized him from The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and then
that's right.
He's unceremoniously knocked out of the film really quickly.
Yeah, and he's the one who gets murdered.
And I was like, hey, he's here. I recognize A Creature from the Black Lagoon, for those of you guys that don't know, is my favorite of the monsters from the Universal monsters. Not exactly my favorite movie. It's top level for me, but I love Creature from the Black Lagoon.
It's very
I watch
original.
it a lot, and I watched the 3D version of it a lot. So I've had Richard Dunning in my home because of the 3D elements of that movie. So seeing him on the film, I was like, hey, great! And then a couple minutes later,
he's gone. So, yeah, there's interesting camera work for on-set exterior shots. I think the funeral is in studio.
Okay.
I think they even made it rain. I think they maybe had an opening, and it was still raining. So you do have a cliche of a funeral in the rain. But it's actually shot really well. Yeah, but instead it still has that silent film kind of shot to it. You have this public assassination out in the street, like almost looks like the Warner Brothers street lot.
Yeah.
But it still looks authentic. It looks great. It just doesn't have the delivered punch because we see what's going to happen, and it just kind of seems you're detached from it. I would actually shoot that a little more close up of the guy getting shot rather than doing a wide scope of everybody's reaction. I actually would make it a little more intense. And I think that's the problem with it. There's not a lot of intimacy with the characters in this movie. They're kind of just doing this marking line and say it.
The filming feels incidental. Like it does feel like a studio film. Like it feels like there's less thought behind like how would this shot work? Would it work better bigger? Would it look better smaller? Like how would this interaction work? Would it look better this way lit, that way lit? There is that kind of problem to it, and maybe that comes with it. I think editors have the toughest job in a film. Moving from an editor to a director standpoint is you're overseeing someone else editing your product. You're trying to create something in shooting that will edit well. And I wonder if that kind of created a little bit of
smoothly.
an overflow.
So you do these things that don't have any disruption. So you have take 20 of the same shot.
Yeah.
And you're trying to find out the best take of that. Which nowadays you would do multiple different shots.
Yeah, you get like 30 cameras in there.
30 cameras, you know.
One other thing I wanted to point out, I read something rather interesting about the film that I thought we should discuss, and that is that Akira Kurosawa enjoyed the film, and he actually used this not as the blueprint, but inspired by this film in some ways while creating Yojimbo. And I was trying to figure out exactly how that would work, because Yojimbo isn't exactly that similar to this film. It does feature a character playing all sides against each other, which is kind of a smaller element.
That's
to this
interesting.
film.
I never know. Now I'm beginning to see it because Ed Beaumont's trying to figure out, navigate through this political mess of a killing, and thinks that's who's involved, and not necessarily he's right all the time. But right, I can understand that it's almost bitter primal. It's almost Shakespearean. It's bitter family rivalry kind of.
Well, and so much of Kurosawa has elements of Shakespeare in it, has elements of that.
Right.
And it's funny that, again, we go back to how every Western ever made is inspired by a Kurosawa film. But then it's nice to see that Kurosawa got inspiration from noir and from films of America. It's a cyclical nature of filmmakers building off of each other. I think it's a fascinating thing. It makes me want to revisit Yojimbo. We'll probably do that on the show eventually. And then and kind of look at this comparison again through that lens.
So I think overall, I think the charm of Alan Ladd works. I don't think he goes through the crucible. I mean, he gets beat up very rough in this movie.
He's good at getting beaten up.
Yeah, it's one of the most interesting. One of the things that stays with you is how badly he gets beat up in the movie. Mm-hmm. And in the hospital scene is kind of charming because he kisses the nurse and she's like, "Oh, well."
That's true. Don't do that in hospitals. If you're there now,
you get a phone call.
You get a phone call and a slap.
Yeah.
One thing I think might have helped his character through this journey is something that I felt was just drastically missing from his character in this film, and that is that he has no cats to pet. There's no cat interactions whatsoever.
He needs something, right? I think the book he has the glass key throughout, and he talks about it.
It feels like that element was missing. I had to look up the glass key as what did that mean in the time period? Because I think it's mentioned in one single line in the film. But the idea of like a key that is easily broken, one that you can easily lose the key to the person's house. And you can't
duplicate because it's made out of glass.
Yeah, the book Shadow Man, The Life of Dashiell Hammett terminized the glass key as a symbol of the act or experience that cannot be reversed or forgotten. Is something that can, I can't forgive you for what you did. You've shattered the key in some way. And it's an interesting symbol. It's one that I wish had been more prevalent in the film because it's such a good title. I'm a fan of all sort of glass movie titles.
So you have Paul Medbeg playing by Brian Denlevy. His character is a political force. He's not running for an office, but he has such power persuasion of anybody on his side that he will help boost to get elected. And then you have somebody who's running for, I think, governor.
I think that was what it was.
Henry.
Again, they don't get into the politics of it all.
Right, and I think it's the Henry family, and he's very powerful and very connected, is using Paul Medbeg as a political force to get his name out there. And then when his daughter?
Yeah, I guess his daughter is, I think so.
But he's dating another person on the side, so they have this tangling web of who the heck's dating him. Paul Medbeg's sister's seeing him, and it's been Bonita, hers, and then you have Veronica Lake, is her brother, I think, and he's gambling
That's
all the time.
tangled web of the families dating each other. We're like one step away from Targaryen level relationships because these two families are so intertwined.
We're close to it. We're close to it. It's that entanglement, Game of Thrones entanglement. House and this and house and that. I think what works in the book doesn't get translated all that fleshed out much in the movie. I think you have a mood right. I think you have a lot of interesting characters. I think the bad guy who owns the property where the newspaper gets sold. I think the Nick characters. I think even the tough guys are kind of fleshed out a little bit. But I don't think there's something that I can retain that keeps me want to go, oh yeah, that movie. Let's put it in and watch it. But I think Dashiell Hammett as a writer understands the entanglements and I think he got it right with the story.
Okay.
Just doesn't project it out on film.
Interesting. Yeah. Have you seen the 35 film beginning to end? Have you listened to the 1946 radio play?
No.
With Orson Welles.
Orson Welles did it?
I think Orson Welles was connected to the radio play. I don't know if he did a voice or not, but had connections to it. So I was curious. I was going to try and get my hands on the radio play because I've done this.
And I've never read the book. I've read Dashiell Hammett's The Thin Man, Maltese Falcon, and Red Harvest. I even got copies of those. I have not have a copy of The Glass Key. I don't know if I could find it.
I'm sure it's out there in public domain. I'm sure you can get a PDF of it or something. But yeah. It's a movie. Yeah, didn't love it, but I can see why people would. And I think that's my caveat is if you're a fan of film noir, if you like,
and if you're a fan of Dashiell Hammett,
if you're a fan of Dashiell Hammett, I think this is definitely something to check out. Yeah. It's just kind of if you're outside that membrane or that purview, maybe need not apply. Maybe your business is better spent elsewhere. That's my take, at least.
And it's a little deflating of an ending. But I think if you love noirs like I do, and I still love the movie with all the kind of the increments that I have needs to be worked on it. But the other interesting is it's such a production kind of film. There's really no signature individual staple to it. It's like, oh yeah, that works, we'll put it in. Oh yeah, that works, put it in. We got all the assemblage right, kick it out.
Yeah, it's a movie assembled by Lego. It's got all the pieces here, and here's how it puts together. One thing though I will say, when near the movie's final act, I did actually have my only time. I was watching the movie pretty quiet in the darkness with my cats. And one moment at the end of the film, I'm like, oh, I did have an moment in the movie. And I don't always get that. And that was the moment, and I guess spoiler alert, go watch the movie first and then come back. When Janet Henry is accused by Ed Beaumont as being the killer. And he says the cops are on their way. And he uses that as leverage to get the real killer to come out.
Yeah.
That was a moment for me where I was like, oh, in my home. And so I got to give credit to that.
Yeah. It's what Dashiell Hammett works best is you dazzle them with here because authentically there is no mystery. Mm-hmm. We've kind of knew all along. And then when it says like, oh, that makes sense.
It's almost like creating a bunch of huff and puff. Like really like glamorizing the mystery when it was Guy A all the time.
Yeah,
like
that's
it was
classic noir.
The butler did it from the very beginning kind of a thing.
The Big Sleep. Who was responsible for the first person you see in the movie?
Yeah.
She comes down the steps.
That's true. That's become a frickin' stable, hasn't it?
Yeah. Just like the Maltese Falcon. Well, who's the problem? The first person you come see in the office.
And again, with that film, the Maltese Falcon is completely nonsense. Like, the actual Falcon doesn't matter to the film whatsoever.
Spoiler, every movie is nonsense. It doesn't make sense. Every movie does not make sense.
It's going to be a lot of trouble for the notes I've taken on Star Wars.
If you dress up as a bat and go out and fight crime, you're going to be shot dead within 5 minutes.
Cancel my weekend plans.
All right. So, have you seen The Glass Key? Are you a noir fan? Are you interested in watching it?
Yeah, let us know your thoughts down below. Do you have the Shout Select version of the film? Do you have one of the out-of-print DVDs? We'd like to hear about it. So let us know down in the comments your thoughts about the film. And is there another Dashiell Hammett adaptation that we've forgotten to discuss?
We're going to get to The Third Man. Definitely.
Oh, probably.
The Thin Man, definitely. We're going to get to that. The Thin Man and The Third Man.
There you go. Double feature that.
Double feature.
So let us know your thoughts on the film down below. While you're down there, please like and subscribe. There are 2 free things that you can do that help to support the channel immensely, and they make sure you never miss new episodes of the show as they drop. We do appreciate that. You can also check out the Patreon down below. This episode, I think, is coming out at the beginning of September. So check out last month's episodes in our Patreon exclusive. You can find our Picks with Kyle and Nick episode where we do some of our favorite show and tell items that we currently own. You can also check out our show The Road to De Palma where we had our first episode talking about Raising Cain. Those are Patreon exclusive things you can get joining the Patreon down below for as little as $1 a month. If you join at the $5 tier, you can help pick some of the films that we talk about. Hey, if you enjoyed our episode on Robot Jocks last month, you can join the Patreon and help pick some of the films that we talk about next month. And from all of us here at the show, thank you for joining us. You can find all my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast, a podcast you can find anywhere on the internet. And if you did a modern version, it would be like the Glass Key Card.
Ooh.